Okay. I have a bit of experience with 40k, but mostly just collecting the models, some casual games amongst friends, and that was when I was in late elementary and early high school. My friends and I also played quite a bit of Dawn of War, but that's basically my exposure to it. Space Marine is a game where you play as an ultramarine and kill a lot of dudes. Seriously, it wouldn't surprise me if your kill counts were in the thousands. It's a mix of hack and slash and third-person shooting. It works pretty well for the most part. It's a bit of an odd mashup, so the fact that it does both competently is worth noting. It's basically all you do. The game is combat, and there's a huge amount of it. The only real deviations are the few sections where you get a jump pack, which are probably the most fun parts of the game, or the occasional rail shooter where you're on a dropship and you're shooting guys. In typical action game fashion, you're given upgrades at arbitrary times. Feels very frequent in the beginning, with you starting with essentially a worthless loadout and getting a standard loadout of a bolter and chainsword quite quickly. A lot of the weapons, I guess, are kind of considered side grades rather than upgrades. The chainsword and power axe feel very similar and not necessarily stronger than each other. The power axe is apparently better versus armored enemies, but it doesn't really feel that way. The thunderhammer is definitely stronger, but at the same time it restricts your access to bigger secondary weapons like the las cannon, which really sucks in the later stages of the game. I kind of flip-flopped on the chainsword and power axe for a lot of the game, and I took Thunderhammer every so often. I feel the most useful optional weapons were the meltagun and the las cannon because of the sheer power that they have. The meltagun is like a shotgun on steroids, and the las cannon is a super-powered sniper rifle. Both are the most useful at the end of the game when you start fighting like orc knobs and chaos forces that can be pretty big damage sponges. The meltagun and las cannon just tear through them. You have infinite ammo for your pistol, but you never need to use it. I never ran out of ammo for my bolter, and the ammo caches are frequent enough that you're always equipped with whatever you choose to take. Space Marine's combat is structured around killing a lot of dudes. That's not a problem until you have to fight a boss. So what are all the boss fights like in Space Marine? You fight a lot of dudes. There's a dropship which periodically throws goons down at you. You fight the orc war boss who has a horde of orcs with him. You don't really fight Nemeroth, but you do fight several waves of trash mobs before him. This is actually really apparent in games with a style similar to Space Marine, like Assassin's Creed, Shadow of Mordor, Batman, Arkham, whatever. The combat is designed around fighting tons of enemies, so single enemy encounters are almost always awkward or terrible, if they're even present. To circumvent that awkwardness, they just keep throwing hordes of enemies at you, which makes all the encounters feel exactly the same. The finale is especially bad. You end the game after several waves of enemies with a series of quick time events in a game that is largely devoid of them, and it feels totally out of place and boring. So the orcs all have British accents, and that just sounds wrong to me. I know that Games Workshop is a British company, so I get it. It feels really out of place. Other than that, Space Marine and 40k in general takes itself pretty damn seriously, even though it's completely stupid and ridiculous. I would describe Warhammer 40k lore as cool but dumb, to say the least. Thankfully, Space Marine doesn't delve too deep and it stays mostly on the cool end. If it went too deep, it would definitely wander into completely off-the-rails stupid. So just for your reference, Space Marines are able to spit acid with gene seed number 17, the betchers gland. They have extra hearts, organs that make wounds instantly close and scar, and a slew of other bullshit that feels like a kid in a schoolyard made it up. It just sounds like stuff that you'd have like kids in a playground going, "Oh, your Space Marine's in prison." He's like, "Nuh-uh, my Space Marine can spit acid and he breaks through the chains and escapes." That's what a lot of the lore in 40k feels like, but let's talk about just Space Marine the game. So the Imperial Guardsmen refer to you as "me lord."
Yes, me lord.
Which again kind of reinforces the dumb side of 40k. Then you have Inquisitor Drogon, who you're escorting throughout the game. He gets wounded, and he starts saying that he's controlling the blood loss via his psychic abilities, which again is just like, yeah, okay man, whatever. There's a scene at the very end that just looks really stupid and silly. It's the Space Marines all walking towards a dropship, and it looks really bad. It looks like they took the actual Games Workshop models and made them walk around. It feels really out of place, especially because you never look like that running around throughout the main game. So in terms of the actual game, there's some minor stuff. The weapon and ammo caches you find throughout the game are always laid out exactly the same. They're clearly just copy-pasted, drag and dropped, whatever. I did actually end up in a couple of situations where events just didn't trigger. At the beginning when you first meet Lieutenant Mirror, the cutscene just didn't trigger and I had to restart. That happened a few more times throughout the game, so there is definitely some roughness around the edges. Otherwise, the game is competent. Nothing really stands out as horrendous or really good, so that's all I got. Graphics are pretty decent, voice acting is fine, it's just all kind of not noteworthy. Space Marine is pretty standard in terms of difficulty in modern games. You'll die, but the deaths aren't super punishing, and it won't happen too frequently. After the first hour or so, you'll need to take a step back from the hack and slash, and you'll focus more on staying back and playing it kind of like it's a cover-based shooter, mainly because of what I consider one really significant oversight. Space Marine is designed around recovering your HP via executing enemies, so you're constantly in the fray killing enemies with executions to combat the constant damage you're taking. When you initiate and execute, you actually are still vulnerable to damage and even death. Most games make you invincible during cutscene kills, but Space Marine doesn't. A lot of the executions are fairly lengthy, and you don't get HP back until the very end. It can lead to a lot of deaths that I feel are unjustified. Weak enemies give you basically nothing, but they're quick to execute, and the stronger ones are about 75%, but are a lot slower to execute. I'll say this right now, but dying during an execute just feels terrible, and it happened enough that I was pretty annoyed by it. I didn't actually die that much though. There are some sections that felt more difficult than others. I think I died the most at this one section where you're trying to activate an elevator at the Titan and a swarm of orcs come, and it just felt more difficult than anything else so far. It was most likely because of a weak loadout and stronger enemy types, right before I got some key upgrades. I died to the dropship a couple times, but I think I cleared it on my second or third attempt. Other than that, it was mostly smooth sailing. There's a few sections at the end of the game with the jump pack where you can very easily fall off, miss a platform, and die. So that can be kind of annoying. That part really showcases the kind of inconsistent checkpoint system. You know, some checkpoints are really close together and others feel few and far between. That's kind of just a thing in modern games though. I actually beat Space Marine in a single day with a completion time of 6 hours and 7 minutes on the dot. It's pretty good length, and the pacing is pretty good. There are sections that are very dense with combat, followed immediately by ones that are just you running to the next objective, which feels kind of strange. It might have been better to have less dense combat, and have had you fighting smaller skirmishes more frequently while moving to the next objective instead of what Space Marine is, which is run, fight, run, fight. That's all there is. There is one section about midway through where you're going through a facility and it's just fighting the automated turrets of the security system. That section really stood out to me as being bad and just completely for padding. It was super boring and it was very non-threatening to get through. Space Marine does have a bit of a bait and switch where you start off fighting orcs and end up fighting the forces of chaos. I don't mind it. I think it's kind of cool when you're fighting both chaos and orcs in that transitionary period. That felt pretty good. The problem is it takes forever to actually fight the orc war boss. You see him at least 3 times throughout the game, but by the time you fight him, you're in full swing with the chaos marines, and it feels just a little bit too late. So like I said, 40k is kind of dumb, but here's the story. The Forge world Graia is attacked by a huge amount of orcs. The Ultramarines are dispatched to secure the assets of Graia, which includes a Titan. Captain Titus, Sergeant Sidonius, and some young buck who loves the Codex Astartes named Leandros are dispatched to secure the assets. After landing on Graia, you encounter Imperial Guard being led by Lieutenant Mirror, and you do some typical game mission-y type stuff. You eventually find Inquisitor Drogon, who has been researching a new power source. Drogon says the power source can be used to destroy the entire orc invasion, and you go along with him. When you finally go and activate the weapon, it doesn't actually destroy the orcs. It instead opens a warp gate and the forces of chaos invade Graia. It turns out that Inquisitor Drogon was basically a corpse being puppeteered by a chaos lord named Nemeroth, which is fucking silly. Nemeroth kills Sidonius and runs off to use the power source to transform into a demon prince. Captain Titus goes after him because he has some resistance to the warp, which is really fucking convenient. So Titus finds Nemeroth and conveniently gets there when he's at his weakest during the transformation. Titus proceeds to bash the shit out of him and literally crushes his head like a grape. And it's all over. Leandros decided to be a little tattletale because the Codex Astartes told him some garbage about the warp. Then Captain Titus goes with the Inquisitor and the game ends. 2 sequels planned, but we're never getting them because THQ is dead. I mean, it's alright. There's nothing to write home about. I was a bit shocked the first time when the Chaos Marines came in because it felt like it was out of the blue, even with the emphasis on the power source throughout the game. I didn't see it coming. I thought I would just be killing orcs the whole game. Same thing with the ending. It's kind of out of the blue and it doesn't really feel satisfying. Killing Nemeroth is a series of QTEs, which sucks. Then the Inquisition showing up and taking Titus away is just a second slap in the face. Nothing else really worth talking about in the story otherwise, honestly. Pretty by the book, stuff you'd expect. Obviously the ending was sequel baiting, but that's not going to happen. It kind of sucks because I think Space Marine had potential to be a good series. Honestly, Space Marine didn't really have me on the edge of my seat. I wasn't bored for most of it, but it was very by the books in terms of what you would expect from a game like this. Executions are fairly satisfying and have an appropriate amount of gore. There's actually a lot of blood in Space Marine, which is cool, and it feels like they were really pushing for that M rating. When Space Marine first came out, I actually played quite a bit of the online. It was fun. I don't know how active it is anymore, but it was cool to customize your Marine and fight other people. I mostly just use the Assault Marine setups, which I found to be the best parts of the main game. Single player is kind of just It's not great, it's not awful. I'd say it's a baseline for enjoyment, but it's repetitive and not really something you'll remember a week down the line, unless you're a 40k fan. The biggest flaw and oversight of Space Marine is that there's no co-op. In 40k canon, something stupid like 3 or 4 Marines is considered a reasonable response to millions of orcs. You even do have a squad, but they end up being largely absent from the game. A squad of 3 or 4 Marines is the perfect setup for an amazing co-op action game. It's a no-brainer. It would have gave the rather short and kind of uninteresting main story a huge boost to its replayability and fun factor. It would have been amazing to crush orcs with your buddies. I wouldn't even mind if it was pretty bare bones in story, honestly. You could just be some generic helmeted Ultramarine squad on the other side of Gaia doing something else entirely, and it still would have been fun. Space Marine was desperate for a co-op campaign in some capacity. Space Marine does the logical game thing and does stuff like not letting you take a Thunder Hammer and use your las cannon at the same time. The issue I have with that is that it's what I would consider a no fun allowed kind of thing. Being a Space Marine should be really fun. The lore is so ridiculous for Space Marines that you don't even really need to have logic or reason behind it. I get balancing it for multiplayer, sure, do that. But single player should be a completely different beast than multiplayer. I should be able to have my Thunder Hammer and use my las cannon is all I'm saying. It goes along with not being invincible during executes. You just should be. You should be in the fray and swinging your chainsword and blasting orcs for the entire runtime. But as the game goes on, you have to play conservatively and utilize cover, which is really lame. It happens with the larger orcs, and it's almost mandatory in the later sections with the Chaos Marines and Sorcerers. Honestly, if I was to replay Space Marine, I'd probably just play it on easy. It's more fun in these kind of games to feel overpowered and embrace the power fantasy, but I probably won't be replaying it anytime soon. Space Marine isn't amazing, but it's still decent. There are some annoyances like not being invincible during executes and not being able to use the Thunder Hammer and Jetpack as much as I'd like. I would have loved a co-op campaign, and it's just kind of crappy that there isn't one. I had fun with it though. It's short and it's sweet, and it's paced pretty decently. 40k is going to be a take it or leave it thing. Some people love it, some people hate it, but it's still a solid game even if you think 40k is dumb. And it is pretty dumb. It's probably worth it if you're a fan of 40k or you're hurting for a hybrid hack and slash and shooter. I might actually recommend you play it on easy because like I said, you gotta embrace the power fantasy. When all's said and done though, it's decent, but you'd probably be better off playing something better. Either a dedicated third-person shooter like Gears of War or a dedicated hack and slash. Otherwise it's safe to avoid. It gets a recommendation because nothing really stood out as atrocious or bad enough to warrant not recommending it.
On dive, on Zyga.